there is no direct path. It's only in looking back that we can see those moments and say, I had to go through that in order to get to today. You're the most imperfect, perfect parent for your child. And that's all that ultimately matters, regardless of what paths you ultimately end up taking.
Hello, hello. This is Samantha Saxby with another episode of Moms with Benefits. And today I am so excited to be chatting with Zaiba Hasan. Zaiba is in the corporate wellness consulting space, specifically focusing on women in the workplace and DEI. She's a CEO, she's a coach, she's a podcast host. She does all the things. And of course, she's a mother. So, welcome, welcome, welcome. We're so excited to chat with you today.
No, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate. I've been listening and binge listening to some of your episodes, and I love that this is a resource that's available for people that wasn't in the beginning of my journey. So I love that you guys are doing this.
Oh, we appreciate that. Thanks. So, I'd love to start out with you kind of just giving us a lay of the land. Tell me about your family life. Tell me about your career, those two worlds that you have going on.
So I probably have a unique unique experience because I know that the demographic for this podcast is younger moms. I'm in the process of I have two adult children and two younger children that are in my youngest is actually 11 and my oldest is 20. So I've kind of had this evolution of who I was. I've kind of done those types of things and I'm a different person than who I am today. I'm a mom of four kids, three boys and a girl. So you can imagine that my life is crazy busy, but the truth of the matter is I have learned and I have adjusted my evolution in that work life as a result of having different children and having to adjust and having to be more flexible. My background's in events and I used to plan these huge events and travel and this and that. And then, oops, got pregnant with my first one. And I'm like, that's not happening too much anymore. And my last corporate event client was at the birth of my third one when I'm literally holding him in that Moby. I don't even know if the Mobies exist anymore. And I'm trying to figure out how to get the stuff to the conference. And I was like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. So then I've slowly started realizing, there isn't a space for women that want to be 100% be with their kids and be focused on their own career advancement. And so I decided to take a few months off and then segued more into this DNI workspace support of mothers because I needed it. So I figured if I needed it, if it's not there, build it and hopefully they will come. And I've been very fortunate where that has happened. So I feel like that evolution of who I was back in my 20s to my 30s to now I'm in my mid 40s and loving that has changed and altered, but always with the mom hat as the main focus of all my evolutions.
So, I am very curious because you said, four kids, your oldest is 20, your youngest is now 11. So you're talking to somebody who has almost a 1-year-old. So
Oh,
I'm
that's the
very
best.
yeah, I mean, he's wonderful, but I am very much in the fresh thick of it. And I don't feel like I have a view of what my evolution will or could look like in the next, call it 30 years of
Yes.
parenthood or 20 years.
Mhm.
And so I'd love to hear from you looking back on your 20 years of parenthood. How do you feel like how would you capture the stages, or are there stages? Is it a roller coaster? Like, kind of talk to me through where your segmentation of that time goes.
Honestly, you go through within a day, you can go through periods of pure elation to fatigue to imagining yourself jumping off of a building and being like, I want to end this. I mean, that's the truth of it. And that's probably this underbelly of motherhood and that we don't talk about is, we're expected to be like, oh my God, it's amazing and he smells like flowers and da 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 da, and I love it and my transition is easy. No, but there are days where you're breastfeeding this kid, and you're lying in bed with a dead face on and you're literally imagining what would life be like if I fly off this building. And the fact that we don't talk about that means that we can't develop the support for that. So I have had moments, clearly, I always joke, I had two kids close together, and then my husband begged me for a third 5 years later. And then we ended up, settling on four. So obviously I went from I'm done having kids, never doing this again. I can't believe that this is my life to I love everything about it, and all the good things and good pieces of myself are as a result of all the positives and the negatives that I've had to face as a mother and all the challenges. And but trust me, I've had the potty training challenge, the sleep deprivation to potential drug uses and things like that. Like I've seen the gamut of it all, and I'm still learning, right? I'm still in that process where I'm looking at people that are ahead and saying, okay, how can you pass on your knowledge to me so that I can take that, make it my own, and put it into my children. So the one thing I would want to say in looking back is that there is no direct path. It's only in looking back that we can see those moments and say, I had to go through that in order to get to today. And the only one piece of advice is to recognize that you're the most imperfect, perfect parent for your child. And that's all that ultimately matters, regardless of what paths you ultimately end up taking.
You're the most imperfect, perfect parent for your child. I love that. And to go back to another phrase that you said in the beginning, of your comments of, "If we don't talk about it, we can't build the support for it."
Yes.
That's powerful, and I've never really heard it expressed like that, but it makes a lot of sense. Like, I think in motherhood, the dialogue out there is really about changing the narrative, and it feels like it's related to, like, if we don't even talk about it.
How can we do that?
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So it's almost like it's not just talking to talk, like, it's not just talking to, like, complain or, like, vent. It's like,
Yes.
no, like, let's bring these issues to light, to awareness so that when enough of us are struggling in a similar way, there's gotta be a way as a society, as a community, as a group of women, mothers to be able to build the support for it.
Yeah, 100%. Like, we don't talk enough about the fact that I can't run now because I pee in my pants every time I run, right? Like, there are
Same.
basic things, that you're like, "Okay," but guess what? If you talk about that and if you're willing to be vulnerable and open up, you'd be recognized, "Okay, wait a second. There are multiple people that are dealing with this exact thing. Why are we not talking? It's not always rainbows and butterflies and, unicorns. Sometimes you're in the depths of the depth, and the only way I can get out of it is knowing or maybe listening to somebody that has gone through it and says, "Okay, this is a dark moment. It will pass. Just trust the process and you can move on." We only can get to that stage if we're open, honest, and vulnerable with each other as a female community.
Totally. You mentioned a little bit, I think you were alluding to it, that, in terms of your, I don't work-life balance, which balance is in air quotes, and, like, let's talk about how you feel about that, number 1. Number 2, what I heard was, each child brings a new need to, like, adjust that
Mhm.
equation or that balance or kind of whatever the mindset is between these 2 worlds that you have. So talk to me about that.
First of all, the concept of work life balance, I feel like we need to change the narrative around that because, we allude to it, we put it in quotation marks, but really, there is no work life balance. Period, hard stop. And the reason why I'm saying that is not to say that at some point, I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer, but if you're going to think, oh, on every day I'm going to be able to get X and Y and Z done, you're setting yourself up for failure. It's a societal construct that has been developed. I mean, I'm just going to go into history here by the patriarchal system that this is what women are supposed to be doing. Guess what? That's not the case. We are not meant to be carrying the full load financially, physically, emotionally in the household. So that's something I need to just tell people right now. So I actively tell people, like when I hear the work life, like I literally start cringing because I'm like, ladies, there are days that you can maybe do two things and that should be okay. And the only way that's okay is if we change the narrative, the vocabulary, the vernacular around that concept. So for me, it's not work life balance, but it's more of alignment, who we are as your soul in that moment. And that changes on a daily basis. It changes with all the major things that happen in your life, whether it's having a child, you're having marital strifes, you're having financial difficulties, you take on a new client. And so the expectations of what you need to do changes. Guess what? All that has to be changed and adjusted. And that means that you're more prioritizing things, like you're putting that in a more categorical prioritization, and sometimes the priority might just be, "I'm exhausted, I've physically been up with a sick kid, I'm going to take the time to heal, recover, so that I can get up and fight again the next day." That changes, and that looks different every single day. There is no picture of what the perfect balance is supposed to look like.
So, it's really taking this concept of alignment, like living in alignment, would you say? Is that
And
like a good and
harmony with
harmony?
yourself.
Okay.
Like, there are days where you physically feel off, right? So, your 10 things on your to-do list is likely not gonna happen. Or your kid you wake up, your kid is sick. Like, that happens a lot, especially for newer moms, if you're putting the kids in daycare or school. I mean, trust me, we get every single disease known to man at the beginning of the year. How do you adjust for that? How do you have to have this concept of, being flexible, and the only way we can do that is if we can really break down that societal expectations that our house has to be clean, our kids have to look beautiful and be Photoshop ready, we need to have worked out and eaten a we have to figure out how we as a community can allow people the opportunity to experience their own internal harmony, and that looks different for every single person at every single space of their life.
So, I have a question, and it feels a little silly asking this, but how like, what does it feel like, in your opinion and in your experience, to live in alignment and harmony?
For me personally, is if at the end of the day, I feel like I did the best that I could with everything that was kinda thrown at me, I'm gonna be okay with that. And that could be as simple as, like, I had long haul COVID. It literally impacted my physical health for over a year. And that's really what started getting me to this space, to be honest with you. This happened in August of 2020. I can tell you exactly when it happened. And the reason why it happened was because I was one of those, I'm just gonna be blunt with you, I was type A. Come on, just get up at 4 in the morning. What's the big deal? I have 4 kids, I go out and I do this, like, who are you to complain? I fully admit my ego was so big because I was like, "If I can do it, what is wrong with you?" And then I got hit with COVID, and there were days where literally getting out of bed, I physically couldn't do it. So my brain wanted to do X, Y, and Z, but my body was like, what are you doing? And then I recognized that hamster wheel, that go, 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 that constant need to be the best mom. I will do the homemade things. I will this, that really impacted me physically, so much so that I was so sick for over a year. I ended up not being able to take clients, ended up barely like surviving my day to day. And I feel like that was my body's way of telling me, you need to stop. You need to reevaluate. And that really put me on this internal journey to be like, what is it that I'm doing wrong? And I realized I was doing everything wrong. I was part of the problem. I was recreating that narrative secretly and sometimes not so secretly, judging other people that couldn't keep up. And I recognized that it impacted me in such a toxic physical level that I couldn't sustain as I'm moving to this next chapter of my life. I couldn't sustain it. So, what did I need to do? I needed to really step back, reevaluate, reprioritize, and, the one thing that really I to say a lot is we always say we will die for our children, right? Like, there's no mother, no new mother that comes in and says, "I wouldn't die for my kids," but are you truly living for them? Are you living in their best version of yourself, your mental, physical, emotional self? And I will argue there's a high percentage of us mothers that are not doing that.
That is super interesting, and I don't know whether this is related, but my brain just went to my husband and I's vows at our wedding, and that part of our vows was, like, we promise to take care of ourselves, like, individually,
Mhm.
so that we have more love and life to give to each other, and it feels like that concept applies here.
Oh, 100%. It's that oxygen mask, right? Like, if you
Yeah,
can't breathe, how can you help anybody else breathe?
yeah. fully agree. The listen to your body takeaway that I heard from you, it can be transformative, I would say, if you can confidently kind of learn your body, whether it's mind muscle connection, that's kind of like a workout phrase, but like
Yes.
even just like kind of feeling where the tenseness is in your body and
Yes.
just taking a check in with your body and making sure you're
Yes.
not in like a flight or fright, no,
Yes.
a freeze. What's that saying? The freeze?
Actually, from a physical perspective, it's a cortisol freeze, right? Like, so when you're in a constant state of stress, which we are, whether we recognize it or not, your body is consistently thinking that an external force is attacking it. It has the same impact on your hormones, on your brain, on your physical health, right? So until you recognize that these external stresses are not actually going to kill you, it's the only way that you can actually deal with that. So that concept of like mind body connection, really being in tuned to what your body is, prioritizing your mental health, your self-care as mothers. It's not selfish to be like, okay, I want to take a minute, I'm going to go work out. I'm going to go take a nap. I'm going to go I have to take naps every day. I fully acknowledge it. I wake up at 4, so I take naps every single day for 20 minutes and I love it. You know, it's okay. Like self-care isn't just about going to the spa and getting your nails done and this. Self-care can be as simple as I'm going to sit on the porch and read 2 chapters alone. That's okay.
Yeah.
And so it's just changing the narrative around what actually is self-care and taking away that concept of being selfish because you wanna prioritize your health and wellness.
So the other thing I heard you say that I feel like I haven't heard from a lot of other moms, but honestly makes sense and kind of clicked a new thing in my head was, the concept of your ego
Mhm.
and feeling like, "I wake up at 4, I can do it,
Yes, exactly.
like so talk to me, like, in your experience, like, where did you learn that that came from, and how did you kind of start recognizing that to evolve your it sounds like your internal dialogue?
Yeah, that's so funny. I mean, that can be a whole therapy session as
Yeah.
I'd like to say. But really it does come from, I'm of that, age group, you guys are all a lot younger than I am. I'm of that age group as, Gen X, millennial, like, we can do it all. We saw our moms go back to work. We said we were the latchkey kids. We were the ones who did it. We're like, "Who are you to complain about X and Y and Z? Like, you're too soft, you're too this." Honestly, I would argue that it stemmed from I was in first grade and having to come home and take care of my siblings and, having those types of life experiences that kind of dictated and honestly, and that concept of hard work. What is it? Hard work is martyring yourself because we saw our mothers do it. And so that became ingrained. It was only when it started impacting me physically that I was like, wait a second. Who am I trying to impress? And then you have the onslaught of like Instagram with the perfect pictures, and you're like, I have to look like this, and get that $1 million client, and be this sexy, amazing wife when my husband comes home, and all of that. But and realizing like, yeah, we can do it all and we're going to, but to what extent and to what consequence? And you can say, oh, that's societal, but you could at some point you take value in yourself that you're like, I can do these things. And that really is your ego speaking. And it's only an acknowledgement that, okay, is this something that's really helpful, really a good idea, really great? Or is it my ego saying, I can go take that meeting, look good, go and, volunteer in my kid's classroom. He wants cookies. Let me go make those cookies and clean my house at the same time. It's a very ego-driven thing. It's the ability to be like, "Oh, I can do it, and you can't." Right? And saying, "I can," you're also implying that somebody else can't do that. And that is so toxic on so many levels because one, it's toxic for yourself, but it's also toxic to this community that you feel like you are quote unquote a part of and that you want to try to support. Are we actually supporting one another if we continue that dialogue within ourselves and externally?
Yeah, that makes me also think of, like, shoulding and the
Mhm.
concept of yeah, so, like, I call it
You should be breastfeeding. Did you do your cloth diapering? Did you do this? Oh, you're gonna put
mhm.
your kid in daycare? You don't wanna get a perfect I mean, no.
Yeah.
Why are we doing like those mom wars that are still prevalent comes from this, that ego. It's very ego driven, whether we want to admit it to ourselves or not.
Yeah, that's interesting. We could do a whole therapy session
Yeah,
on that, I think.
exactly. Yeah, like, what is it about us? What does our mom say? Who are we trying
Yeah.
to prove? Like, why
Yeah,
are we trying to prove something for ourselves or trying to prove something to society? Da, 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 da. Yeah, it really is about
yeah,
that. But when you start honestly thinking, okay, I can't care what somebody else wants for my family. And this is where I can't, you're the most imperfect, perfect parent for your family. And that means you're not comparing yourself to your neighbor. You're not judge. And I find myself still having that dialogue. I'm not going, I'm human. I've done a lot of work, therapy, all of that, and I still am like, "Wait a second. She's doing X and Y and Z. They're on this amazing spring break. I'm stuck in the house." Da, da, da. That comparing, you have to, it's a daily struggle. I can't say for other people, but for me to be like, "Okay, this is good for my family. That's good for theirs," and respecting the choices all of us ultimately make for the betterment of our family.
yes, period.
Period.
All right, so let's kind of, given all that we've just talked about, let's kinda do an overlay of the financial impact.
Yes.
So talk to me about the financial situation in your household. How does that work? Who runs the decisions? Is there any shoulding or egos involved? Like, talk to me about that.
I would imagine if you have 2 strong personalities like my husband and myself, there's a lot of, egos involved, but that having been said, my husband and I have been together for 27 years, married for 25, obviously has seen a evolution from being teenagers to now in our 40s, and my husband is in his 50s. So how we do things in our family is likely a lot different than what newer, I would say the newer generation is doing. In our culture, I happen to be of Muslim descent. It's very much his money is my money is my money. We both have equal say in the finances, but the truth of the matter is, we kind of had to. We made different choices than I would necessarily want for my daughter. For instance, as she was 18, I was 18 when I met my husband. I was like, oh my God, I would want her to do something very, very different. So I guess I can come at it from what I did, what I would want for my daughter is very two different things. It ended up
Yeah.
ultimately working out, obviously as it did. But when you meet somebody in your teens and then you've kind of grown together, you kind of are like, we made a conscientious choice because my husband went back to school, did that. I pregnant accidentally. My two older children know that. I love them for that, and they fully accept that, and they laugh about it now. But we had to make a choice. We were poor. We didn't have resources. We didn't have family support. So it didn't make sense for me to go back to work in event planning when I had to travel so much when I had two young children and my husband was going back to graduate school. So we made a different decision. I stayed home for the first couple of years while he was doing that. So it was hard for me always have been working, since I was 12 years old to all of a sudden being a stay at home mom. It was not the best and easiest transition for me, for full disclosure. And I had to start doing something for myself, which is why I kind of went into my own business. Obviously, you get paid in the business sense, and I had to kind of really focus and cultivate that. But the truth of the matter is, I started working, doing all those things, and I was still kind of that emotional load of parenthood still falls on the mom. If my kids would get sick from school, I would be the one that had. It didn't matter that I had a client meeting. My husband would be like, "I can't do that," so it would fall onto me. That having been said, now that I do have an 18-year-old daughter who's kind of going into that phase of life, first of all, I'm like, don't get married that young. I would do it all over again, but I would say, please just wait, take your time, really figure out who you are as a person. And I would want her to be very, very much financially independent and not codependent, because that was where I was in the very beginning. I mean, ultimately, it worked out well for me. I mean, I married the love of my life, but that's not the case for a lot of people that get married that young. So I would argue, do as I say, not as I do in this particular circumstance, that, having your own avenue, with everything that's going on right now, to make money, to keep it on your own. I feel like we don't talk about that enough as well. And then sharing, funds for like household expenses and things like that. Obviously, you as a family are going to prioritize. We're going to do retirement, college funds, these types of things that would come out of the joint, and then you each have your own individual accounts. And I would say, as somebody who has gone through that one way of doing things, I would want for my daughter to have her own thing and her own individual personhood before becoming a joint couple, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
totally. So I think that's definitely a theme that's talked about a lot is this concept of financial independence,
Yes.
financial stability, and that there's a lot of folks out there, if they're thinking about getting married or
Yes.
thinking about kids, like they feel like they need to get in a certain place financially to be
Yes.
financially independent, secure before they take that step. And so that makes a lot of sense, and interesting to hear that that is what you would recommend,
Yeah.
knowing that
Even
that's
though I
not
did something
necessarily.
totally different.
Yeah,
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 no, I did something totally different.
yeah, but it's also, I mean, times are different
Change,
too.
yeah,
Like,
exactly.
there's all the cultural and the social impact that
Yeah,
obviously affects our changes too of when you grow up and
100%.
and stuff like that. So, curious, how do you feel like you have brought finances and financial education or this concept of financial independence to the forefront of your kids' minds?
So the reality is I hate anything to do with finances. Even though my husband's like, babe, you have to know these things. Poor guy has really tried to make. I'm like, I just want to do the coaching. I don't care where I get paid and do all those things. And then my accountant's like, no, you cannot do that. So I have to fully admit and acknowledge that that is not the place that I grew up. And I would also argue it wasn't necessarily the cultural norm for back in my day. That having been said, because of that, I want my kids to be extremely financially savvy. I mean, I've had, my oldest, he's 20. He's like one of the most popular DJs at his college right now, and he gets paid a lot of money to do those types of things. And this stemmed from me saying he couldn't join a fraternity. So, and now he didn't join a fraternity, but now he DJs every single party. So, he managed to get around it, but he's getting paid to do that. So I give him kudos and credit.
I
But
love that.
but it's more of like them understanding, once you're done with school, our big thing is we will pay for every single education. We want to put you in the best, and we're fortunate enough to do that. And we're privileged to do that. But once you leave that educational world, you're on your own. So you need to figure that piece out. We're here to help guide you, but ultimately you have to do it on your own. So my kids are, I would even argue, a lot more financially savvy than a lot of adults are, because we've kind of made that one. It was my shortcoming. Two, my husband, he does these for companies every single day. So as a result of that, he's really imposing a lot of his knowledge onto the kids. My kids, they buy their own stocks with their graduation money. Like my son could have bought whatever, but he was like, nope, I'm going to buy stocks. So we prioritize financial knowledge because that is always changing. And I feel like that's something a little bit different than what was necessarily done for us when we were kids. And I respect the fact that they're doing that because I didn't have that financial education.
Did I hear right that, for education, you are paying for that on behalf of your kids, but
Yes.
it sounds like they know the cost of that, like, it's talked
Yes.
about of, like, it's not just, like, a freebie, it's like, "Nope, this is what it costs," and so that's part of the
And this is what it
discussion.
costs, and they have an expectation of what grades.
Mm.
And I know that sounds bad, but guess what? I had to work full time to go through college. Had to pay for my own school. They're not in that situation, right? So if your entire job is to go to school, our expectation is you will do well because we've taken all that extra noise out of the equation. And if you do not do well, you will be responsible for that class. So you best believe my kids are going to class and they're making the best thing out of it because we're like, we will not pay for a class that you decided to barely go to. And I feel like because of that, that work ethic, that they're developing. Granted, he's DJing parties on the weekend, so clearly he has a work-life alignment. He's enjoying that. But when it's time to like study and do that, he understands the expectation that we have from him to succeed because we put him in a privileged position to succeed. So he should take advantage of that. That sounds mean and hardcore, I know, but we're very strict about that.
No, I mean, I think it makes sense, and, so as a mom of 4 kids, like, that's expensive.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
can you give
Especially
me
nowadays.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, "Oh my golly," like, it's 4 kids. I mean, people just they're not having 4 kids anymore,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
how do you tie 4 kids? Is that expensive? Is that where your mind goes? Talk to me about 4 kids and the cost of it.
So it's a lot. I will say it right now, but I'll give you a for instance. My oldest, he got accepted into an amazing school that it was a bit because he's doing business. That's go figure, and it was out of state. And he also got an amazing offer from an in-state school. By the way, both academically high in the top, I think 15 schools. And, one was 80 grand a year, one was 30 grand a year. And we were just like, we can either pay for your grad school if you stay in state, or you're on your own for grad school if you go out of state. And we didn't sway him. We allowed him the opportunity to make that choice. And he ultimately decided to stay in state and save that 50 grand, $50,000 a year, because college is expensive. And that's,
Mhm.
by the way, not including room and board. And now he's a big advocate for that. So my daughter is in that phase where she's having to pick between schools, and we're all about like, if you get into Harvard, we will facilitate and pay for that. But if you go, that's your job, and you better succeed. And we ultimately give them their choice. So my daughter, as we're all her offers, we're at that stage where her college offers are coming in, she's looking at it from that lens, and she's doing the research. I'm going to look at this college. This is the program I want to go into. This is how much it is versus this. I mean, and even a cost. I mean, my oldest did a cost benefit analysis of post school jobs he would get depending, and then ultimately making that choice. Do we guide them? Do we help give them, sources and things like that? Absolutely. But in the end, we can either pay for your grad school too, which nowadays, unfortunately, as you know, with the job market the way that it is, you need a grad degree in order to get any kind of decent paying job, or you're on your own for that. So ultimately, it's up to you to decide, and we have the same rules for all of four of them. This is what you need to do, and this is how we'll best support you. But again, if you're going to do it, you're going to do the best that you can given that particular situation. But it is a challenge, right? Because they are growing up in a privileged place. We can afford it. Not a lot of families can. How do you make the best choices with the information that you're given? I feel pretty prideful, not ego filled, that my kids are making those choices the best way possible, given all the choices that they were given.
Thank you for sharing all that because that
I'm
feels
just
like
being real
yeah,
about
no,
it.
I love it, because it's an interesting balance of finances, of parenting choices, of, just
How to
talking
best
about
support
things.
them without coddling
Yeah.
them, that's a big
Yeah.
thing.
Especially when if there is a certain privilege where, like, you can afford college or afford grad school, like, that's another privilege element to it too, and so it's
Yes.
just it's very interesting, and so I just thank you for your honesty of, like, how you've been navigating that because that's just a reality
Yeah.
of, I think, a lot of folks, so thank
And
you.
we're still learning, by the way, for the work. We don't have all the answers. We're still
Yeah.
working on it, and each kid is gonna have a different thing, right? Like, that's the
Yeah.
other thing too, like, what works for one kid is not gonna work for another kid, so you have to be
Yeah.
open and flexible to that as well.
Yeah. Totally. All right. Well, thank you so much for
No,
joining
thank
us.
you.
If folks wanna, check you out, do you have an Instagram? Do you have I know you have a podcast, like, where can people find you?
You can find me, at Emerge Co we're in the this is the issue, we're in the process of, like, I'm changing all of my branding, but you can
Okay.
just, email me at zaiba@emergeconsulting.solutions. I'm happy to answer any of your questions, when I have a better literally, I'm working with the website designer right now. When I have everything transferred over, I will send it your way. But in the meantime, you can kind of just find me at the basketball courts of the DMV DC metro area or the baseball fields. That's where I will be between now and end of June, all my extra time. Not gonna lie about that.
Spoken like a true mom. I love it. All right. Well, thank you again so much for joining us. And we look forward to supporting each other as we continue
Yes,
out from here.
absolutely. Thank you for having me.
If you are currently expecting or just looking to plan ahead, check out perkyleave.com to learn more about your leave benefits. Moms with Benefits is chasing financial and emotional stability for motherhood. If you've resonated with any of the stories from our moms, we'd love for you to give us a rating and quick review to help spread the word. You'll also find Moms with Benefits on Instagram at momswithbenefits.org. Keep going and keep growing, Mama.